G'day. In this episode of the Stomp podcast, I talked to Sam Naney, Director of Coaching at Uphill Athlete and former elite cross-country skier, and is also the coach of Cody Townsend, who I am quite a fan of. We're going to talk about aerobic training and touch a little bit on strength training for basically uphill athletes or mountaineering skiing. This is not really fully focused of anyone who might follow me because of my freestyle background. For freestyle skiing, I guess it's most important to be somewhat flexible, really explosive and strong so you can take the impacts. While that is what I've been training in the past, that has not been enough to keep me fit, healthy and full of energy today. Sadly, I'm rarely the happy person that you see on YouTube. When I make videos, I act as myself on my best days. Mostly that is acting, kinda, of like being me, which is pretty easy, I know that. But I just sadly ever have that energy. I usually feel kind of crappy and sluggish. But not when I was younger, then I had awesome energy all the time. But thanks to my friend Marcus Boss at LP, and he 2 years ago told me about the importance of low intensity training for improving my mitochondrial function and energy. And it has really worked. It makes me be that fun person Jens you see in my YouTube videos more often. That's why I'm kind of excited to share this video with you guys, or podcast, so that maybe you also try. Go for a slow run, ski tour, hike something, do a via ferrata, do anything. And I hope it'll benefit you as much as it has benefited me. Enough rambling now. Enjoy this conversation with Sam Naney. Good day, sir. Thank you so much for joining me today. Yeah, I'm pretty good, thanks. I had a nice day, nice little morning mountain bike ride today with some slippery routes. It was rather exciting.
Excellent. I hear it's getting pretty hot over there.
Yeah, man, it's been super hot. How are you over there in Washington State?
Good, very well. Yeah, we have summertime in full force here as well. It's gotten quite warm, so much of the snow that we could be skiing on through late spring is melting away and leading to more alpine rock climbing and trail running.
Well, that sounds pretty rad. Here the snow is also mostly gone. So is that your main sport in the summer? Trail running and some rock climbing? Yeah,
mostly. It just any sort of movement through the mountains, technical climbing and running, and finding new routes over terrain. That's the way I like to move around here when I can't be skiing.
And it's my first time interviewing someone like this, almost like a podcast. Maybe it'll be one of those too. Who knows? It feels fun, at least. I'm like pretty stoked on this.
Yeah, no, it's having the conversations are always a good time.
Yeah. So then I'll just get started with kind of saying hi to you.
Yeah, please.
Perfect. Hi, Samuel. Great to have you on the show. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and your background in mountain sports?
Yeah. So my name is Sam Naney, and I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in the United States. Much of my childhood growing up, I got involved in cross-country skiing and used that as a way to be in the outdoors, and then also lots of rock climbing and mountain biking and skiing in the backcountry. But cross-country skiing was really my main pursuit for through my teenage years, and then into my 20s. I raced on the professional circuit in the U.S. and some in Europe. And during that time, I was being coached by Scott Johnston, who later went on to write training for the new alpinism, and then training for the uphill athlete with Steve House. They're right there, exactly. And
I haven't read it yet. So I got it the day before the 4,000 meter project. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, nice, perfect. All right, so you're on track. No, it's Yeah, so a lot of it was a great opportunity. You know, Scott was a fantastic coach and a close friend when we were working together for my ski racing, and during that time we ended up sort of indirectly experimenting with and exploring a lot of the training ideas that ended up creating the foundation for those books, along with the work that he did extensively with Steve for Steve's Alpinism. And so when they launched Uphill Athlete, the business, it was an opportunity for me to step more into a coaching role after my athletic career, and work with mountain athletes, skiers, runners, mountaineers of all stripes. So yeah, I retired from ski racing when I was about 30 years old, about 7 years ago, and now just enjoy getting out, do a lot of backcountry skiing, rock climbing in the summertime, a lot of trail running, and yeah, raising a family here in the mountains of the Northwest.
It sounds like you're a lucky man.
Yeah, I count myself fortunate. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, it has a lot of advantage being fit, and I think it just gives you a good life, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. It's having a base of fitness from any number of endurance sports sort of gives you that, exactly, gives you that foundation to where you can explore other ways to move through the mountains. And with that aerobic fitness, it gives you a tremendous leg up. You have durability, you have resilience. You can just get more out of the time you spend.
Yeah, I'm from northern Sweden myself, and I could definitely have gone into cross-country skiing too. But I ended up doing that just some every winter, like 10, 15 rounds of cross-country skiing, because it was the only aerobic sport I enjoyed when I was young. Otherwise, I was just focusing on freestyle skiing, freestyle mountain biking, skateboarding. You get some aerobic fitness too there, but not to the same extent. And it's first now when I'm plus 30, I'm starting to get into being a bit fit, because I started experiencing more fatigue and my energy wouldn't really be quite enough without it. And by starting doing some running and more ski touring and mountain biking, life was improving. And I hope to take it much further in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. No, they're all ways to, I think, again, being able to move through the mountains in any different form, and especially when you can start combining those ways, fast on foot approaches to ski lines, skiing them, coming back down, or involving climbing into it, any way that you can sort of mash all of that together, it just creates a more rich experience.
Yeah. How you can be philosophical if you want. What is the main difference as you see it between like a flat sport like running and ski mountaineering, for example?
Yeah, well, it sort of depends on what we're looking at in terms of the specifics of each one. Because at the basic level, whether you're running on flat terrain or you're skinning or booting up something steep in the mountains with skis, the base component of good aerobic fitness and muscular strength they're the same. In the sense that you need to have this, a robust aerobic system, which is, an ability to utilize oxygen to power your muscles essentially in the most economical way possible, using the least amount of fuel in your body. And the ability that you have to do that is going to be the same whether you're a fit marathon runner or a fit ski mountaineer. And similarly with strength, with kind of foundational strength, if you have good movement, the muscles that you're using for the sport are capable of withstanding fatigue and going for longer and longer periods, those components are going to contribute whether you're running on flat or going uphill. The differences come in terms of the specificity of movement. So obviously, a runner on flat terrain is going to have a high cadence. Their technique is going to look different than a ski mountaineer who's climbing up a really steep couloir, for instance, with their skis on their back. Their cadence is a lot lower. Their speed is a lot lower. So The requirements in terms of how you're moving are different, but the underlying foundation, that is that aerobic capacity, we can call it endurance, both aerobically and also muscularly, are equally important in both cases.
Mm-hmm. So it comes perhaps more down to training a wee bit differently for me that's more interested in booting up a couloir versus a marathon runner.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way we often think about training is you identify what your objective is. So for instance, approaching and climbing up and skiing a big line in the mountains versus running a marathon, and sort of work backward from what that objective is. We identify the things that you need to have in place to do that objective. So if you're a ski mountaineer, you need to have good leg strength. You need to certainly have that endurance to go for a long time. You need to have good ski technique. And the muscular strength to carry the load on your back, move up in the vertical terrain. And then we work backward, again, back to those foundational components, which are the aerobic fitness components and the basic muscular strength. And at a certain point in time prior to your objective, the training that you do might look very similar to the training that a marathon runner would do. It might involve, especially if you're building fitness from a more basic place, it might involve a lot of running on flat ground, because that's the way that you can train at a low enough intensity to build that aerobic fitness. And then as you get fitter, the training that you do toward that ski mountaineering objective starts to look more like the objective itself. Maybe we start incorporating more uphill terrain. You start doing fast hikes uphill with a pack on, for instance. So those things do start to take on more of a specific look. But again, at the beginning stages, I often have skiers in the early summer, in the late spring or early summer. I have a lot of the skiers that I coach doing flat and sort of rolling terrain running, because it's a great way to build fitness. It doesn't put a huge load on them by going up steep hills, so they can maintain an aerobic effort without working too hard and build that base of fitness that we can use later on.
Mm-hmm. What is a nice range of pulse to build aerobic fitness, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's a great question, and sort of the integral point to training really well aerobically, and it's very individual. Mm-hmm. So we use a couple of different methods to help people determine what their appropriate, what we call the aerobic threshold, which is a sort of an intensity that we define by heart rate that people can use to go and train in an endurance sport to build that aerobic capacity. And there are a couple of different ways you can identify that aerobic threshold. Athletes can go to an actual physiology lab, and you've probably seen videos or pictures of people running on a treadmill with a mm-hmm. breathing mask and a technician on the side watching a computer. So that can give you a very accurate look at what basically it's looking at what your body is burning in terms of carbohydrates or fats. But that's obviously a bit more involved and more expensive to do. Another method that we use is to basically take what we would consider to be an educated estimate of what someone's aerobic threshold is, and then test that on a treadmill, and have them do a sustained period on a treadmill, and watch how their heart rate drifts basically over time at a fixed speed and grade. And try to isolate a heart rate that minimizes the amount of that upward drift of intensity, mm-hmm. and by doing so, we can help find that heart rate. But at the most basic level, like the simplest explanation is to say that for most people, when you start training for these endurance sports, the intensity that you need to train at is probably going to feel easier than you're used to. Because most of us, especially those of us that are inclined toward these sports, we like to work hard. We like to push ourselves. We like to feel the effort, and so it's really our inclination is to go at whatever effort feels like we're working, right? If we're going out for an hour or for 3 hours, we want to feel like we got a really good effort in, and quite often that means we're probably working a little too hard to most effectively build an aerobic base. So determining that aerobic threshold heart rate that we're talking about is really critical to sort of having that long-term perspective.
Can you trust, for example, I use a Garmin thing with its standard calculation for the heart rate zones. I try to do a couple of hours a week in the second zone, the blue zone, where I think I build this and base aerobic.
It's tricky again because it's so individual. I mean, there are sort of some basic guidelines that we can use in terms of an athlete's age and their athletic history. We can make again this educated guess on what their heart rate at aerobic threshold might be before we do more extensive tests. But it's not. It doesn't tend to be reliable. The watches, the smart watches that are out there, do a very good job of measuring heart rate, primarily when you use the chest strap. The wrist monitors that come with the watches are pretty unreliable. They don't give a good representation of the actual heart rate at an instantaneous heart rate. And similarly, the zone calculations that are used in the watch operate off of a pretty general range. And so they might give you a rough approximation, but they're not going to be nearly as accurate as doing an individual test that represents what your intensity is and what your aerobic fitness is at the time.
All right. Thank you for that. So not so trustworthy, the basic settings on a watch like that, or maybe Strava or such things. So in the beginning training for mountain sports, you say it would be rather similar to a marathon. You need to build that aerobic capacity. So run, for example, or bike at slow speed. And really, especially in sort of the foundation stages, as you're looking to build aerobic fitness, maybe you haven't done a lot of structured training before. You can do a lot of different things to help that process go. As you say, you can go biking, you can go hiking, you can do running. I think running is a really effective tool for building fitness, but it's also important to, if you haven't run before, to start really gradually. I often encourage athletes to do sort of a run-walk progression. So run for 30 seconds, walk for a minute. Gradually build up, because your muscles and the tissue that supports your joints need to basically get adjusted to the impact of running, and you want to do that carefully so that you don't incur injury. But exactly, I mean, you can go for bike rides, you can go hiking, you can go swimming, you can do running, any sort of these ways in which you can maintain that heart rate, that aerobic threshold, which, as you say, is, especially if you're getting started, will probably mean you're going relatively slow. That's going to help you in building that fitness base. And then what you'll see over time is that you will be able to be going faster in whatever activity you're doing while maintaining that same heart rate, because your body is going to become more economical. It's going to get better at using a given amount of fuel to do work. And so just like a car that, a more economical car that can use a given amount of fuel to go a certain distance, your body is going to get more economical using the same amount of fuel to go further. Mm-hmm. And that is best built in this low intensity running.
Yeah, exactly. Low intensity something. And running is great, because especially if you're an athlete that is doing any sort of activity on foot, whether it's running itself, or if it's hiking or skiing and climbing on skis, moving bipedally, on your feet is going to be more specific and beneficial. Riding a bike is a really useful way to get yourself into that heart rate zone, but the limitation of riding a bike, if your ultimate goal is to climb mountains, whether on foot or on skis, the limitation of a bike is that it's so mechanically advantaged and you're sitting that it doesn't put the same load on your body. And so eventually you do need to transition away from the bike onto something that looks more like the activity that you want to do.
Makes completely sense. when I coach freestyle skiing, I obviously try to make every exercise we do be as closely related to what the final goal is. If it's a cool trick or a nice maneuver.
Specificity. Yeah.
It makes 100% sense that biking is not ideal. It's just so darn fun blasting down these Swiss mountains on it.
It is. Well, and that's the thing that I always encourage people to remember is that, the reason we train is to do the things that we love and be able to do more of them and go farther into the mountains. And so, even if you are a ski mountaineer or if you're a trail runner, and in a training sense, being more specific in training for those activities is going to be helpful. I wouldn't necessarily encourage people to just stop biking. If you love to mountain bike, then keep that in your regimen because it's so much fun, and that's why we do all this stuff. And the best thing you can do is just recognize the relative benefits and potential drawbacks of all the things that you do, and try to fit them into this complete package, and with regard to how you're preparing for your ultimate objective.
Now this makes perfect sense, and let's say I have a feeling there's a great number of people that are a little bit similar to me, who is just out doing the sports they love. I go ski touring as often as I can in the winter, summer, hike, bike, climb, and with not so much structure. More than I quite enjoy this low intensity training, so I think I have a decent capacity. But now for me to push myself further into the mountains, I don't really know how to move forward. I read a little bit on your website, and I like the sandcastles metaphor.
Yeah. So, well, basically, what we're trying to do is build this. Again, we talk about the idea of a base, and what you can think about it as a sandcastle. Think about it as simply a house. But in whatever we want to do, that base, which is comprised of that aerobic work that we do, that training at that low intensity, the bigger that base of support, the better we can build things on top of it. And those things we build on top of it might be power, muscular power to be able to move faster, to cover more terrain in a given amount of time. It could be these specific elements of technique, whether you're skiing or biking, speed, those different components. But you need to have the capacity to do that work. And so if you think about the metaphor of a sandcastle or a house, if your aerobic base is really small or really brittle, not very secure, then anything you try to do on top of that is going to risk collapsing the whole thing. And so it has to be done in sequence, building that base, and then from there continuing to go up. And as you say, it's great to be able to do all of these different sports throughout the year, but inevitably, I think for most of us, as we get more excited about particular activities, going deeper into the mountains to ski a big line, or climbing a taller peak that requires a longer approach, the requirements to do those things get more significant, and so we have to become more structured in how we do our work. It no longer is enough to kind of just pick and choose activities throughout the week as they fit into our routine. We need to be a little bit more structured, think more about a long-term plan, and see particularly how it can progress. That is, building in terms of the total volume of training that you're doing, building in terms of the types of intensity that you're using, primarily in that aerobic zone, but also selectively using higher intensity, which can be really beneficial to build muscular power and speed. So, it really comes down to thinking in sort of the long term, and thinking about how you can progress the work that you do and continue really carefully stressing your body and recovering and stressing and recovering over time to make it more resilient. I'm
going to try to I just love this article on your website. I'll add a link to it in the description. They call it Model of Endurance Sandcastles, where it basically said you have that basic endurance we've been talking about for a while is basically dry sand. If you just sprinkle that kind of in one place, after a while it's going to be like a pyramid. But you got to sprinkle an awful lot of sand to make it kind of much bigger. It gets kind of stuck. But then they said you can add water to it, which is high intensity training. So if you add a little bit of water to it, you can make it steeper and taller, so your fitness becomes higher. And then you can add expertise, so the skill of skiing or running efficiently, and you can shape it even higher. And I love that thing, but I don't really know how to add that high intensity training and how much. But I thought it was a brilliant article you guys had written there.
Yeah, no, I think the metaphor is really good. I believe that was one of our coaches, Scott Semple, who wrote that, who is a very accomplished ski mountaineer and alpinist. And the idea is exactly that. So you can build this aerobic base, and an aerobic base is the critical piece to being an endurance athlete and being a mountain athlete. But if you want to progress, if you want to be able to go farther in the mountains, go faster in the mountains, you do need to add that intensity. And there are a lot of different ways you can do it. There's a traditional interval style training that has become really popularized. High intensity interval training and different methods, but it can take many forms. We'll often, and again, it depends on the nature of the activity. So if you're a marathon or a half marathon runner, then the type of intensity you need to do really needs to represent running fast and building your ability to extend that running speed. If you're a ski mountaineer, obviously the speed at which you're moving, and thinking ski mountaineer separate from ski mountaineering racing. So we're talking backcountry skiing or free skiing. The speed at which you're moving is obviously going to be a lot slower than what a marathon runner needs. And so the intensity that you want to work on may have to build muscular endurance. So essentially the ability to be carrying your pack, your skis, perhaps breaking trail if you're booting up a steep couloir, and be able to do that for longer without getting overcome by fatigue. Pace is certainly helpful. You want to be moving at a certain rate, but the objective isn't necessarily going as fast as possible. It's about being able to sustain over a long period and a lot of vertical terrain. So the intervals that you might do to train that upper end fitness for that activity of ski mountaineering are going to look different than what the marathon runner does to get faster in the marathon.
How could that look for someone like me? Now when I did that, my first 4,000 meter peak, the first day it was just 800 vert with a pretty heavy pack, skis and boots on the backpack, in sneakers, 20 degrees Celsius hot. That was rather sweaty and a steep trail. How would I train to get better at such things? Are you suggesting like interval training in such a setting, or just doing it at a high pace?
Yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, again, I'll always come back to the idea that for a certain period of time, the best gains that you can make is to build your aerobic fitness. But at a certain point each year, we need to decide, okay, we've done an ample amount of work in the aerobic fitness realm, and now we're going to add in some intensity, some higher intensity, and your body needs to be able to absorb that and to recover from it. And just as an example of something that you might do for training for these a climb of the 4,000 meter peak, I might have you do something like 4 times 5 minutes uphill at an intensity that around what we would call the anaerobic threshold. So we have two intensity thresholds that we think about. The first is your aerobic threshold, which is what we've been talking about. It's that sort of optimal point to train your aerobic fitness. It's maximizing the utilization of fats as fuel. And as you go up in intensity, you start working harder, you reach a second threshold, which is known as your anaerobic threshold, or sometimes the steady state. And that's the point where you're burning more carbohydrates than fat at that point. And when you burn carbohydrates, there's a process in your body where there's basically a byproduct that comes out of that carbohydrate production known as lactate. And that lactate will circulate back through the body, and we can use it as fuel. But if we don't effectively use all of it, it'll accumulate and through various processes that basically starts to fatigue the muscles. The balance in your muscles starts to get a bit upset, and we feel fatigue and we slow down. So this anaerobic threshold is a point at which you are producing that lactate, but it's getting reused in your body at basically the same rate that you're producing it. So there's this balance point, as we say, the steady state. And that's a really effective place to train for these longer endurance events, because you're obviously operating at a higher effort. You're producing more power from your muscles, but it's sustainable. It's an effort that you might be able to go at for 60 to 90 minutes. And so that would be an effort that I might suggest to you to go and do a good long warm up, and then maybe do 4 or 5 times 5 minutes uphill at that intensity. And so it's not all out. It's not a maximal effort. It's something where you're moving at a pretty good rate. And over time, when you do that workout, you can add time to the on time. So maybe you do 5 by 6 minutes the next week. You can also add intervals. So maybe then you do 6 by 6 minutes, 6 by 7 minutes. There are a lot of different ways you can sort of tweak these different dials for how to create that intensity effect. But particularly for athletes who are looking at longer objectives, something in excess of a couple of hours, and certainly 5, 6, 8 hour long efforts, that's a really effective training intensity to utilize, because it helps produce this muscular power, this muscular endurance effect that we're looking to train.
Cool. I'm actually looking forward to doing one of these. Yeah, I guess I'll do 4 times 5 minutes the first time. I'm going to run up that mountain next to me. Is it fine to do like a trail uphill for this? Or do you recommend having a pack and more hiking or steep running?
Yeah, so what I tend to do is try to think about all the different loads or stresses that we apply, and apply them selectively one at a time. So when you first start doing that sort of intensity, I wouldn't use a pack. I would use, it's okay to use uphill terrain, because the vertical gain, the steepness is going to create an effect on those muscles. It's going to be specific, but it's definitely going to help raise that heart rate up to the intensity you're looking for. And then after you've done workouts like that for several weeks and you've built your ability to go faster, then you could consider adding weight, because that has a degree of specificity to it. When you're doing these climbs, you probably have a pack on, you're carrying your skis. But I don't generally recommend that people start with weight, because what that will do is, obviously when you put weight on, it slows you down. And so if you start doing the intervals with weight on, you're going to end up doing the intervals at a slower pace. And your body is going to learn whatever it is that you impose upon it. So it's going to learn that, okay, that slower pace is where I need to operate. Whereas what we want to do is train your speed first. We want to get you moving fast. And then as you're moving faster, then put a small amount of weight on and try to get as close to that speed that you've already been doing with that new weight. And then gradually add more weight, try to keep the speed the same or close to it. So that we're always paying attention to the fact that you're moving as fast as possible, whether you have weight on or not.
Perfect. I don't know. It gets me a little fired up to run up this hill at that pace. I think it's gonna suck. I don't love being at that high pulse. I don't think I'm born with your genes of being that person who wants to suffer. But I'm getting more and more into it. As the fitter you get, is unbelievable how much less it sucks to be at the high pulse for a long time once you got decently fit, like what I think I am right now. It's difficult to completely avoid the suffering, right? But
you come to appreciate it more. You know, it's I think what we've all felt when we don't have that base of fitness is that suffering is just sort of permeates throughout the entire activity. But as you get fitter, you can find more of an optimal place of output where you're working hard, but it feels good. You feel like you're moving, and then you can always push the throttle a little bit. You can work a little bit harder and then dial back and push harder and dial back. So I think fitness, as you say, it doesn't eliminate the suffering, but it makes it something where we can control it a little bit more. And that, I think, is a real advantage when you're moving through the mountains. It just gives you more control. And you know, what we really talk about a lot too with mountain athletes is that the fitter you are, the safer you can be. Obviously, it doesn't account for everything, but to be fit gives you flexibility and gives you durability. Oftentimes, when we're in the mountains, there are a lot of things that can come up unexpectedly. Objective hazard, unexpected injury, circumstances that change the plan. And if you have fitness, you can be adaptable to that. You can move faster to get through a certain piece of terrain that's potentially hazardous, or if weather is moving in that you want to get out of. If you have an incident where you need to perform a rescue, you need to get out of the mountains really quickly. Having fitness to do so, to maybe carry extra weight, or in worst case scenarios, help a partner out of the mountains. You know, having the fitness and strength to do that, it can be critical. It can be the difference between something tragic and some, an avoidance of that. So it's something that's not just about being able to enjoy the process better or achieve an outcome faster. It also provides a great deal of safety to us moving the mountains.
Yeah, and I felt how my fitness this winter was lacking twice, where it was making my journey in the mountains more dangerous, that I was perhaps the least fit person in the group. When it was kind of safe, when we were approaching the peak of this Gran Paradiso, I was starting to feel a bit tired and kind of wanted to slow the pace down, but I didn't want to be a chicken, so I didn't tell the guide. I was like, fuck it, let's suffer for a bit up here. We're almost there. It went easier than I thought, but it was getting hard, and my balance was feeling a little wobbly, and I thought, that's not so good, if this would be exposed, which it wasn't at the time. At the top, it was exposed, but then I had time to, breathe a little, and the balance was back. But I also did my first ski mountaineering thing with ice axe and crampons this winter. Joined some friends. It was kind of exposed. It was kind of you shouldn't fall situation, and we had been moving really fast from early in the morning for my taste at least. And I was feeling like shit. It would have been nice to be fitter now, because this is pretty dangerous right now. And for those reasons, especially, I think I want to learn to train better for those situations, just like you said. Give you a bit of a greater margin for error. Yeah, exactly. Both physically and mentally, right? Because if we all know that when we get tired, it's more difficult to make decisions, to be thinking rationally. Our brain requires energy as well. It requires fuel, and so when you start fatiguing your muscles, the body is having to make decisions about where to send that fuel. And if we're really fatigued and we're standing in the mountains in a potentially hazardous place trying to make decisions, then the more fatigued we are, the more difficult it is to evaluate all those circumstances and make rational calls. So having that base of fitness, that reserve, isn't just helpful from the physical standpoint. It's also really critical from a decision-making standpoint, risk assessment, and all those factors that are so critical in being in the mountains. Yeah, fun point. I'm happy you brought that up. But on top of doing lots of that low-intensity training and then some of that higher-intensity training, like 4 times 5 minutes, for example, would you like to add anything else to a person in my situation, to my training program? So strength training is really critical.
And there are many different, just like intensity training, there are a lot of different ways to tackle strength training. At a certain point, we're building strength by doing the activity itself. So when you're skinning up on the mountainside in the winter, or when you're booting up a steep couloir, there's strength that's happening there. There's a training effect that takes place. But what is also really helpful is in the training season, in the season preceding your activity, doing some work again to lay a foundation. That principle again of building the base with strength exercises that focus on single leg strength and particularly supportive strength. So training those smaller muscles that support our joints, that support single leg balance and movement, allow you to then go and do that harder work and be supported in it. Because oftentimes what we face in not being strong enough is a risk of injury. And so what we want to do in the preseason, in addition to building that aerobic fitness, is to build strength that's going to support our bones and our muscles from getting. So to be very flexible is to be very strong, for example. So doing strength training leading up to your objective is really critical. And just like, as I said, intensity training, there are a lot of different ways to perform strength. And it depends on the activity. It depends on the history of the athlete. But for example, for the last year or so, we've been working with a physical therapist out of Chamonix, who has done a tremendous job with helping us to create a strength series we call Chamonix Mountain Fit. That is it's a video series that you can find on our website that does a really good job with training exactly these principles of single leg strength and balance and mobility and functional movement that then you can take onto the trail or onto the skin track and build upon in a more specific way. So that, if you do nothing else, doing strength training like that is going to really help you in being more resilient again against injury and just being able to do your training better.
Yeah, as a freestyle skier, I've always been doing the strength part of this training, but very little aerobic fitness in the past. It's just so nice, but I always did more like normal back squats, front squats, deadlifts. Made sure I had really strong legs back, decent core. But I noticed you say single leg strength often. Are we then talking like stepping up on a box, for example, or lunges?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Stepping up on a box, lunges, split squats, and then even dynamic movement. I'll have athletes
like jumping
on one foot on either side. Yep, exactly. So that would be more like a plyometric or an explosive type strength. But again, when we think about the activities that we're doing, running, ski touring, freestyle skiing, any of these things, we're not standing on 2 feet at the same time. Even when you're skiing, you're weighting one foot or the other, depending on the turn, depending on the terrain. So we really want to make sure that we're strong on one leg. And that's where, exercises like you're talking about, back squats or deadlifts are really, really valuable for training what we call the prime movers, the big muscle groups in our lower legs. But at a certain point, we also want to train, again, those smaller muscles that support the stability of a single leg. So it's covering all our bases in terms of providing that, again, injury resistance and functional movement.
Okay, so I shouldn't stop deadlifting and squatting.
No, keep it up. Just make sure you've got the other pieces in there as well.
Oh, it's great. I'm feeling psyched to having you motivate that a little bit further, because I always found the single leg stuff a little bit on the boring side. Maybe I'm not creative enough, or just the fact that it takes twice as long.
Yeah, it's similar to the low intensity aerobic training. It doesn't quite feel as sexy, and as powerful. But you put that work in the bank, and then it's going to make you feel a lot better when you do go out and do those intervals, or you are doing the objective where you're moving fast uphill. And ultimately, none of us want to get injured, because getting injured sucks. And so if you can do the work in advance to make you more functional so that you reduce the risk of injury, that's just going to mean you're spending more time in the mountains.
Absolutely agree with that. It is absolutely crucial, I guess, for everyone. In freestyle skiing especially, because we know that we're going to take some hits on the hip, like fly 20 meters and land on the hip. It's
well, and that's the thing, you know, and you know, we didn't even mention, you know, I'm talking about, you know, single leg stability, but core strength, you know, and having a really strong core, which is, you know, basically your trunk from your up here, and that, you know, the ability to hold your body upright and be really strong is crucial for all of these things. Whether you're moving uphill or you're performing jumps and tricks in freestyle skiing, you need to have that strength to hold yourself taut and be in control of your movements. Because if you imagine that your core is weak, it's like having your legs and your upper body separated by a wet spaghetti noodle. You know, and it's going to open you up for injury and other risks if you don't strengthen that and have it be really firm and secure.
Nice that you also chucked in some solid motivation there on core strength. I often see it with the freestyle skiers I coach sometimes that they could have had some more core strength. The balance gets all messed up when it's too bad.
Yeah. I can imagine, yeah, particularly for freestyle skiing, it's an incredibly important component, yeah.
Or just skiing in general as well. I guess any sport.
Yeah.
That requires some strength. That's fun that we ended up there. So some strength training. We obviously just skimmed the surface there. All of this is a very large subject, just like your book here. It's massive. Or the Uphill Athlete book. On the stamina side, if we'd go back there, like for an intermediate person like me, you know, on a ski tour doing 1,000 meters or 3,000 feet up, that's like not a big issue. But I rarely do more than, or much more than that. 1,500 meters sometimes, that's 4,000 feet, I guess. I don't like, how much of all these components would you recommend in like a typical week? The low intensity, high intensity, and a bit of strength.
Yeah, no, great question.
Tricky one.
Well, and you know, it's my answer to some of these questions when people ask has to start with it depends, right? Because it's all individual. But where I would start with you in terms of determining your training is say, okay, well, what's the volume that you're doing right now? So let's say you're doing, you know, 8 hours a week of activity, and on the majority of activity is aerobic effort, this low intensity, and then some of it is maybe higher intensity. Maybe it's some strength training. Maybe it's, you know, riding your bike at a higher rate, or even doing some intervals. So, and thinking about how to build that to go from being able to confidently do, you know, 1,000 meters of gain to 2,000, or even a 3,000 meter day, a big day on skis. What you really need is to be able to build the total volume of training you're doing. Your body needs to be able to handle a big load, so that it can then, you know, handle those specific big loads on skis and mountains. So when you're adding volume to your training, the predominant place to build that volume is the low intensity. And we talk about, you know, when you're looking at the sort of separation of intensities, you want, you know, 90+% of your total training volume to be at or below that aerobic threshold. That is really going to be the best bang for your buck. So if you're doing 10 hours a week of training, you want about 9 hours of that training to be at or below that aerobic threshold at a pretty low intensity. And then the remaining time might be occupied with some strength, could be some intensity training. But what you start to see is that if you can add more aerobic hours, you know, maybe now you're doing 12 hours of total training, or even up to 15 or 20 hours of total training. If if the majority of that is aerobic, it still leaves you time to be able to add these more specific components of strength and high intensity. But again, sandcastle analogy, or the house foundation analogy, the bigger the base, the more work you're able to do. And consequently, the more recovery you need to make sure you build in. You need to, what we think about with training is that the training, the actual activity that you do, gets you tired, right? It fatigues you. It's the recovery process. It's resting after that training that actually gets you stronger. Because the training itself makes you weak. Ultimately, it tires you out. It stresses your body. And then when you recover well, your body adapts to that stress. So imagine as you sort of bend and stress your body, let it recover, back strong.
Yeah.
So each time you train and recover, you get to the next step and you're a little bit stronger. So when things in terms of adding volume to your training, that's a good thing, provided the majority of it is low intensity, and provided that you incorporate recovery at regular intervals. And an easy way to think about it that we often break down for athletes is spend 3 weeks of building your volume up with more activity, and then take a 4th week really easy. Maybe you lower the volume down to lower it by 30 or 40% and have a pretty easy week. Let your body fully recover, and then go back and do another 3 weeks of building volume. And you cycle your training like that, and you'll see yourself start to get stronger and more resilient.
Sounds good. I totally wrote that up so I can, start now with that. 90% below aerobic threshold. Yeah, that sounds all right. It's my favorite thing to do, I guess.
Yeah.
Kind of
well,
that, or the deadlift.
Well, what you'll find again is that, particularly when you start, aerobic threshold and that low intensity training is going to feel pretty slow. Right? It's going to perhaps even be frustrating to have to move that slow. Maybe you're not able to go out with our friends as much because they hold back. I got to be at my aerobic threshold. But as you do it more, you're going to be able to move faster at that same effort. And what athletes find time and time again is that as they build their fitness, they can go and do the same activity and the same distance that they used to do at a higher intensity. Now they're doing it at a low intensity, but they're still doing it in the same amount of time. And so you're going to get to the point where spending 12, 15 hours at that low aerobic effort is still going to allow you to do a lot of the objectives that you want to do, and you're going to be doing them more economically. Be able to go longer, move faster for less effort.
Nice. Yeah, I am currently doing about 6 hours of biking, ski touring, not so much running. I struggle a little bit keeping the intensity down, because when it's high, it just takes so long to recover, I've noticed. At 6 hours currently, do you think I should keep going at that, or like just increase that low aerobic a bit more maybe? Or talking to you makes me think I should do that.
Yeah, I think just I think add each week, think about add an hour, add about an hour each week of low intensity aerobic training, and see how that feels. Basically what you want to think about when you're increasing your training volume is do it in measurable ways, right? So if you're going to increase the volume 1 week, add an hour of aerobic training and then see how you feel. This is where things like keeping a training log or writing a training diary of how you're feeling is really helpful, because when you get to the end of a week or a couple of week period of training, you can look back at your notes and see how you felt, how you absorbed that training, and that'll help inform what you should do moving forward. If you look back at your notes for a week and the previous 4 days all show I'm really tired, I can barely get out of bed, I'm exhausted, my muscles are sore, those are really good indications that you've reached the capacity of your body in what it can absorb, and you need to take a rest. And then then you recover and you start again. But if you look back at that training diary and it's seeing I feel great, I'm handling the training well, I'm feeling strong, then you've got this ability to increase the volume a little bit. So just taking a systematic approach, looking at it in a long-term perspective is really going to bring the greatest benefits.
Sounds good. Since our time is almost up, could you summarize rather quickly the core elements you've been telling me to do? Because that would be really helpful for the final video on what I learned from the 4,000 meter thing.
Yeah. All right. Let's see here. 4 elements. So I'd say the first and most important piece in thinking about preparing yourself better as an endurance athlete is to have a plan. So move from just going out and exercising to thinking about training. So have a plan, name your objective, and then develop an approach toward it. That's number 1. Second thing is to use the idea of aerobic training as your primary goal. The majority of your training, 90% or more of the volume of time that you're training, should be in that aerobic zone. That is going to be the greatest bang for your buck. Number 3 is to make sure that in addition to that aerobic capacity, you lay a really good foundation of strength. And strength includes not only those heavier lifts like squats and deadlifts and building that big muscular strength, which is really valuable, but also doing the single leg strength, the balance, the mobility, what we call functional movement, so that your body knows how to move in a single leg way, in a dynamic way that is going for sport, particularly. And then the 4th piece is to think about how you can sort of sharpen the knife or increase your speed. So once you've got those other foundation pieces in place, you can start doing some selective high intensity training and more specific workouts to get that speed and that power up to a higher point. And when you put all those pieces together over the course of a training period, that's what's going to give you the greatest returns when you get out on the slopes and you start targeting those bigger mountains.
Love it. It really makes sense, and I want to do this. But the plan there is exciting. I think I can do it myself. But after this,
no, we put it. No, I was just going to say, like, that's the beauty of what's in the book, Training for the Uphill Athlete, is what we have on our website. We really wanted to make that information readily available for people so that you could go and create your own training plan. We provide coaching services. We work with athletes one-on-one on a daily basis to help support that process, to motivate, to encourage, to create that plan. But what we also try to do is really educate athletes so that you can go and do that process yourself and really own it. It's motivating to know that you've got this plan and know you have this process going forward. It makes you want to get out the door and just start charging it right away. Yeah.
Feels good. I learned a lot from this little call with you. It's been really fun. As a maybe last question, do you have any tips on how I could test my current fitness myself? Anyone I could Google for and then learn myself?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the easiest ways to test your fitness is to do what we call like an aerobic time trial. So, pick a route, if it's a trail or just an uphill route in your neighborhood that you can define a clear start and end point. And go and do that route at your prescribed aerobic threshold heart rate. So and you can do it as a maximal effort. You can go, you can do that route as a time trial where you go as hard as possible, and that can give you a baseline that you can retest. But the flip side of doing an all-out time trial is it's more effort. It requires some recovery, and there's different factors that can come into play that might affect it. I think what can be really helpful is to do an aerobic time trial where you hold your heart rate at that aerobic threshold. You don't go above it for that entire distance of the route, and then go back and test it every several weeks. And what you'll see is that as you progress in your training, even by holding that heart rate at the same place, you're going to be going faster. And that's really going to be the best representation that you can find of how much you're improving. That you're keeping the same effort, you're using the same amount of fuel, but you're going faster on that terrain. And that is really what we're looking for.
Great. I have a quick funny story for anyone who's watching this later on. First, it was 2 years ago. I have a really good physio here. He told me, as you complain about fatigue, you should really double down on, I didn't know what it was called at the time, aerobic fitness. And I learned to like it simply because it's not that hard work. You can have a nice conversation. And I biked up to this beautiful trail, Bargis. It's kind of gnarly. What I did this morning, and to keep the pulse that low as I'd been told, I had to bike so slowly, I almost tipped over. I was wobbling like a drunk person across the street. And then just within a few weeks, I could maintain some speed. It was great. And that's just how I accidentally did one of these aerobic time trials you mentioned now. Brilliant. Since you mentioned several times that aerobic threshold, how can a newbie at home figure out more accurately than a Garmin or Suunto can do? How can we figure that out ourselves without having to go to a big lab?
Yeah, so there is a decent estimate that you can make where you essentially take 180 and subtract your age. So if you're 30 years old, then that would mean 180 minus 30, 150 heart rate. And that can give you a rough estimate of what your aerobic threshold would be. To get more accurate than that, you can do, again, what we call an aerobic threshold drift test. And we have articles on our website at Uphill Athlete where you can go and learn how to do that. It's quite simple to do. You can use a treadmill, ideally, to do that test. And that can get you an even more accurate representation of what that heart rate is. But what we found is this 180 minus your age, which is known as a maximal aerobic function number, is a pretty effective way to determine that heart rate, and it's a great starting point.
Great. So 147. Yeah, that's quite a pleasant. That feels like some work. That's a bit higher than where the third zone starts on a Garmin standard. It's more in line with what Strava has as their first or their second pulse zone. Thank you very much for that. I hope to do maybe that test, the drift test. Yeah. It sounds cool. Yeah. Dude, I'm so excited. I almost want to go running now, but I've already done 1 hour of uphill biking today, so I'm all good for today.
You just have to wait till tomorrow.
Yes, and that's the best part of working on aerobic fitness, that you can do it so often.
Yep, exactly. That's the idea is, and the mantra that we try to impart to people is the idea of frequency and duration. So doing aerobic training more frequently and gradually increasing the duration of which you do it. So frequency and duration as you build your training in an aerobic way.
Frequency and duration. Yeah, I'm looking forward to work on that. Dude, it's been brilliant talking to you. Thank you so much for helping me get more fit for my future ski mountaineering objectives and more adventures.
Yeah, you're welcome. Happy to have the chat. Thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, and you guys will be watching. Check out Uphill Athlete. They also have a YouTube channel, and their website really do have some fantastic resources that can help you understand how and why you should do certain things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. I may email you in the future, let you know how I get on, if I'm getting any fit.
Yeah, please do. I hope so. I'll look forward to hearing from you.
Perfect. Yeah, well, that's that for this interview, I think. That was fun.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Jens. It was great to meet you and chat a bit about training.